I'm Nathaniel Cook, and this is my presentation on perceptions and culture. What is web-based social cognition? According to Sabates, it is a manner in which various social psychological phenomena are enacted in the cyber world. So, it's basically how we act and perceive others through the internet or through social media. So as an example, web-based social cognition would be observations one makes about another person through an online profile, social media, or some other form of online interaction. According to Sabates 2012, findings suggest that there is some consistency between first impressions formed in response to observations made in the real world and impressions based on information found on web pages. So the whole idea behind it is do people perceive others online as they do in person, even though they cannot see all of the body language and how a person is behaving in particular. How culture relates to perceptions of others and ourselves. How we perceive somebody has a lot to do with our culture. For an example, a gesture that I, as an American, perceive as rude might be considered a sign of respect in another culture. It is important that when we are immersing ourselves in another culture, we need to be aware of what is the norm in that culture. That way we are not perceived as rude while visiting another country. In the TED Talk video, How Culture Drives Behaviors, Julian S. Burrell sums up how culture relates to perceptions well. He said, "We all see the world through cultural glasses. The lens through which your brain sees the world shapes your reality. If you change the lens, not only can you change the way your brain perceives behaviors, but you can change the way people relate to cultural differences." He then goes on to say that this is the key to diversity. So essentially what he's saying is it's important to see other cultures through their lens and not through your cultural lens from the culture that you were brought up in. It's important in order to understand others, and as he said, that's the key to diversity. So in order to have accurate perceptions and to be perceived accurately in another culture, then it is important to first understand the culture we are in. If we do not understand the culture that we are immersing ourselves in, how are we going to perceive people accurately, and how are we going to be accurately perceived? We may not come off as the happy-go-lucky, nice person that we are if we do not know what gestures and sayings and words are proper within that culture. Do these perceptions vary across cultures? Perceptions do vary across cultures due to different values, beliefs, and morals. As an example, when I was in Afghanistan, it was easy to see that women were perceived less important than men. We rarely, if ever, had women come get medical care at our clinic. Although a lot of perceptions may be the same, I would say that the actions that lead to those perceptions are different. Another example from Afghanistan was to never shake hands or eat with your left hand because that is your dirty hand, whereas in the U.S. it is not thought of as disrespectful or even an issue. So, although perceptions might be the same, defined as the same, there are different actions and words that in other cultures that put off those perceptions. I believe Julian S. Burrell's idea of drawing pictures of different cultural situations is a fantastic way to teach people about the perceptions of different cultures. I like the fact that he came up with this idea to draw different cultural situations, and then it turned into him talking about cultural diversity to millions and millions of people. So for the culture comparison, I decided to go to compare the American culture with the Filipino culture. So the differences among the cultures are, in the American culture, a meal is generally the main dish and a side, but there is no specific item that classifies it as such. In Filipino culture, it is only considered a meal if rice is served. So they see rice as one of the main dishes to make a meal. In the American culture, it is generally not acceptable to eat with hands in public unless it is finger food. In the Filipino culture, it is very acceptable to use hands while eating in public. For the American culture, typical work week is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and people generally work one job. You have your occasional people that work two. But in the Filipino culture, it is not out of the norm for people to work 7 days a week, and most work additional jobs. In American culture, skin color is not looked at in regard to intelligence, which I was surprised by that in the Filipino culture, light skin is correlated with intelligence, and therefore, if you have light skin, you may be more likely to get hired when applying for a job. I found that awfully strange. I don't know if that's like an older thing from the past, but apparently it's part of their culture. And then lastly, most American families want a boy and a girl. So generally, most Americans, I think of their ideal family as having one boy and one girl. And in the Filipino family, they desire male children. I believe it was so they could help out with more work around the home. I don't remember specifically. And then in the Filipino culture, the entire family helps plant and harvest crops. Similarities between the American and Filipino cultures. So I found it interesting that military service is voluntary in the Philippines as well as in America. Generally, money is an indicator of power among both cultures. Is definitely the Philippines looked at as an indicator of power, and I would say that in America, it's pretty much like that too. Generally, it's like a CEO or a big head honcho, that has a lot of money. Both militaries consist of an Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. The only difference there is that America has the Marines. Marriage ceremonies are common practice and tend to be similar. Child care is generally shared between husband and wife, although it did say that fathers don't typically change diapers. Child care is, for the most part, shared. Laws of inheritance are based off those in the U.S., so those would be the same. And in both countries, education is looked at as a path of moving up in the world. So Filipinos see it as, if you're getting educated, then you're moving up and progressing. And I would say it's similar here in the U.S. too. American basketball is huge in the Philippines. That's the only sport that has a court per se in all the schools in the Philippines. And then fast food is present in the Philippines as well as here in the United States. What surprised me most about the Filipino culture was, again, going back to that, they look at light skin as a sign of intelligence. Again, I don't know if this is, something from the past or if it's still really present in the Filipino culture, but either way, it was surprising to me. The fact that families desire male children or female children, although they don't look at females any less, it's just they desire male children more. And then families will often live together to include extended family. So a lot of single aunts, uncles, a lot of extended children, so they're very family-oriented people. And believe it or not, grandparents are the primary caregivers of children. And they say the reason for that is because the parents are at work and the grandparents typically live in the same home, so they care for the children. Another surprising fact was that infant mortality rate is 48.9%. That's staggering numbers, in my opinion, when you look at the U.S.'s health system and how good it is. I don't believe we're even remotely close to that percentage. And then basic health care is provided to all citizens at no cost. Has this research changed my perception about the Filipino culture? I wouldn't say that my perception has changed. I chose the Filipino culture because my wife is half Filipino and I do not know that much about it. I would say that my research does not change my perception, as I have known a lot of Filipinos throughout my life and they all have been great people. The one thing that did surprise me that I would be more curious to know about is the fact that they view light skin as a sign of intelligence. Again, I just wonder if that is still prevalent in today's world or if it is a thing of the past, but it's definitely something I'm interested in researching further. Something that I think was special about the Filipino culture, that I have known this for some time just because I've known so many Filipino people throughout my military careers, that they're very family oriented. I am a family man myself, so I very much like that about their culture. It's really surprising, though, that they do have extended family members live with them and grandparents care for the children. And lastly, I was honestly surprised by the similarities between American and Filipino cultures as well, as far as, the same branches of military, and then the fact that the military is voluntary in the Philippines as well. I was surprised to read about how prevalent fast food is throughout the Philippines. So many similarities among both, and some significant differences as well. That concludes my presentation. Here is a copy of the references that I used for this presentation. Thank you.